We are 10 times faster than the traditional manual ways of calibrating vehicles. We are 5 times more precise on average compared to people doing it by hand. And we tend to be around half the cost. The faster we can get the car back to a motorist's hands, it becomes really hard to displace us.
Nikhil, it's good to see you. We're going to take a few minutes today to reflect back on the last 4 years of your entrepreneurial journey here and hear sort of like the origin story and what you learned along the path and where you are now, et cetera. But really appreciate you making time, and we're going to have some fun.
Excited to do this with you today, Steve. Let's dive in.
So Nikhil, I mean, you're the co-founder and CEO of Kinetic, and the company has evolved. We invested here about 4 years ago now, very early in your lifespan. But let's go back. Let's go back to the origin story. Maybe even before. What were you doing before Kinetic, and then take us up to that point where you started the company?
Yeah, I think that I always think of what I do in 1 decade at a time.
Right.
And so I was doing my master's and my PhD in 2006 and 2007. I was involved with the DARPA Urban Challenge. That was like the big bang of self-driving when DARPA funded these projects at universities, and I was at Carnegie Mellon. And Carnegie Mellon won the race that year. It was really cool to actually see that you can automate driving. It was very rules-based at that stage.
Mm-hmm.
There was very little AI, right? Very little machine learning, a lot of sort of decision tree-based approaches, which wouldn't scale to the real world, but it was sort of a proof that it's possible. And then after I finished my PhD, I went to Berkeley and then I did my PhD, and I started a company where we started building maps with self-driving cars. By this point, you had more and more of these sort of self-driving teams. The Cruise had just spun up. There was Zoox had spun up. There were a bunch of like sidewalk robotics companies. It seemed like a really vibrant thing. There were many distributed points of development. It wasn't like centralized yet. And so there were different companies trying things out different ways. And we were one of those companies that was building mapping technology that could be relevant for self-driving cars. And we built that out in sort of a really unique way where we were sort of crowdsourcing the data of streets from Uber and Lyft cars, where we leased them these camera devices and paid them for every mile that they drove. And that's how we acquired the data. And we used that data to sort of build up-to-date maps and sell them to different sort of robotaxi type of companies. They were all in the R&D stages at the time. And that decade between 2010 to 2020 was really like this R&D decade of self-driving, right? It was around Mobileye had just launched their products, and it was becoming clear that both on the ADAS side and on the self-driving side, a lot of investments were going in, and it was just a matter of when, not if, these cars are going to hit the road. In late 2019, I sold the business to Velodyne LiDAR, the maker of the spinning system on the self-driving cars, and Velodyne went public in 2020. And while I was there, I got to see how the latest and greatest in sensors and algorithms are being integrated into modern cars, right? And the cars themselves are changing, the assembly lines are changing. Cars that arrive at the end of the assembly line are more like a computer with wheels, but with no operating system on them. And so the software was loaded, sensors were calibrated, and then they were shipped off to dealership or directly to a car owner in the case of like Rivian, Lucid, Tesla. And so it became clear that the R&D stage is sort of become much more mature. Yes, they're going to keep redoing it. They're going to keep repainting this. It's going to keep getting better. But there's a version that's now hit production. Right. So by the end of the decade, that was very clear. And that's where the idea started implanting in my mind that, okay, if these are going to be deployed in the real world, who's going to take care of these cars? What is the maintenance and service going to look like? And these cars need precision repair, right? Like they've gone from being predominantly mechanical systems to being predominantly digital systems around a sort of central operating system and a software definition. And so they're going to need precise service, precise inspections, etc. You're going to need robotics and automation. And that precipitated the idea to launch Kinetic. So I can almost think of it as the last decade was the R&D, the D part of R&D, and this decade is very much the sort of deployment and production, and that's what you're seeing. Like every new car is replacing a legacy car with new technology. Even like an EconoBox car, like a Toyota Corolla, is just packed with sensors and capability. And so what we're doing here at Kinetic is to really focus on those cars and what are the kinds of repairs and services that they will need on the digital side.
Very cool. Very cool. Thanks for bringing us to the current state, or close to current state. So then you decide to focus on ADAS calibration. So help us understand, out of all the things you could have selected to do out of the gate, why ADAS calibration?
It was very clear that automation is going to play a big role in the repair and service industry, right? I mean, if you just look at what happens at a car factory, right? Cars are being built, assembled, tested with a lot of robots and automation. But it's a very deterministic world where, if a robot needs to drill a hole at a specific point, it's sort of pre-programmed. It doesn't need to sort of perceive anything, right? Whereas the real world is messy. It's probabilistic. The cars change over time. Suspension changes. When it's gone through repair, that suitcase has been sort of unpacked and repacked, so things are no longer where they used to be. And so, very clearly, it's an interesting problem statement where you need AI in order to sort of bridge that gap from that unstructured world to a structured world where then robots can actually do something. So it's a very, very interesting space, but you have to decide what you're going to do in that space. And so what we said was, let's look at almost like a business school 101 box plot of like skill or dexterity needed for the robot on the one hand, and how much sort of margin or profit it can generate, right? And in that sort of view, it's clear that ADAS calibration is something that requires high skill, right? It's something that people struggle with because there's a lot of measurements involved, and repeatability needs to, it has to be very precise every time that's done. And that's hard for people to sort of do over and over again, and automation does very well. But from like a return on investment perspective or in terms of like what you can actually value capture with that, ADAS calibration was like a sweet spot. So that's why we picked ADAS as the first use case. And to us, we sort of think of it as a wedge use case. It's not the only thing we're going to be doing, but it's large enough to build a large sustainable company and to layer on more products and services over time.
Very cool. Very cool. So fast forward 4 years, how is the company now different than what you envisioned at the time?
The theme of what we're doing has sort of not changed. Right? The goals have not changed. What has changed, though, is the execution and how we go about doing it. Because what we didn't know coming into the space is we knew these cars are going to need calibration. We didn't know when they need it. We didn't know how often they need it. And we didn't know who the buyer is going to be and how we actually roll these out. Right? And so that's what we really learned along the way is initially, when we started the company, we assumed that our first set of customers are going to be actually self-driving car companies. We said that it's most likely going to be self-driving car companies is going to need continuous calibrations, and they're going to want to send cars to a location where they can be quickly calibrated. I still believe that that's going to be relevant in another, call it, N years, where, you ask different people, N is a different number. What we learned very quickly was the painkiller sort of solution that we could offer here was for collision repair, right? That was, we didn't realize that when we started the company, for example. And so we launched our first location in 2023. So it took a couple of years of building the technology. And then we launched our first location in late 2023 in Orange County. And almost instantly, we found that the local dealerships and body shops were finding this solution interesting. And we weren't clear whether so the second unknown was, do we sell the system or do we provide a service? Right? Selling the system is a very standard thing that the technology companies, robotics companies do, and with various sort of business models. But the point is that you get to put that system on site. Whereas in this particular case, there isn't enough ADAS or there wasn't enough ADAS volume at the time to justify installing a system like ours on site. So no single repair shop had the volume to feed the system. And so we said, you know what, let's take a hub and spoke model where we'll build it out and we'll open it up for service to a group of shops, and that way we cross-sell it, and everyone, almost like a gym membership, right? So, something along those lines where it is transactional, it's pay-per-use, rather than having to sort of have a high capex expenditure up front. And that model worked very well locally, and so that's kind of how we started. And so since 2023, over the past couple of years, we've just fine-tuned that model and expanded on it, and we've sort of been building out our network with that.
So you're a serial. I'm gonna dig a little deeper here. You're a serial entrepreneur, successful serial entrepreneur, and like I kind of liken it that entrepreneurs at the early stage are kind of operating in a fog of war. You talked about two examples: who the ideal customer is, and then what the business model is, and how you're going to go to market with different business models, whether it's an ownership model, a subscription model, or whatever. What have you learned over these last two tours of duties as an entrepreneur about how to navigate through that fog of war, and how do you make decisions and calls like that so early on in a company's lifespan?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that it also changes industry to industry and company to company. What I have found is if you were to sort of rewind back the clock to when we started Kinetic, and I knew there was a clear problem statement. Mm-hmm. I knew this was going to be I was looking at it much more from a top-down macro perspective, that the thesis is right, that a solution needs to exist in this space, but what wasn't clear to me was the go-to-market motion. Right. And so we had to build the technology and simultaneously find the right customer base and the right way to sell to that customer. Right. Mm-hmm. So we had the right solution that fits the problem. And I think, this would have been a lot easier had we known exactly what the solution would be, and we were just building the product for that solution. I have found, though, that when it comes to interesting problem statements, it's not even clear to the customer on how they should buy the product. Do they want a product or do they want a service? It's not even clear. And in this particular case, it was interesting because the number of users, so to speak, here were only growing because the number of legacy cars without ADAS are being swapped out with new cars. And so that was sort of, as in the backdrop, it was continuing to scale pretty quickly. And so we were trying to make decisions on something where the goalposts are just latently changing, which is always a very exciting space. And so it came to operational discipline here, right? Not overspending, not getting ahead of our skis. We knew this was going to be a challenge, because had I made a plan on how we were going to sell a product in 2022, when we really started the company, that would not be relevant in 2024 because the market would have changed by then. And so we had to think 2 years ahead and start something in 2022 for a solution that would be relevant in 2024. Those challenges, I don't think I would have been able to, if this was the first time I was building a company, I think that would have been a lot harder to deal with that level of uncertainty. Always hindsight's 2020. So looking back, there are decisions that I would have made differently in this case as well. But those are sort of, blocking and tackling learnings along the way. I think it really comes down to having a sense of when the sort of ground is shifting the way it is in this particular market, where this sort of growth it's growing so fast, ADAS is growing so quickly that there's no way to sort of have predicted what the right product motion would be and the right sort of sales motion would be 2 years before. And so just building out a company where that level of uncertainty is acceptable and you can actually sort of move and pivot to sort of fit the solution to the problem space as we go has really been the main challenge and something that we're really happy about the way we executed with an amazing team.
Awesome, awesome. So let's dwell there for a little bit longer. So if you could rewind the clock 4 years with what you know now, you'd mentioned there, stumbling and things that you would have done differently. What are the big things or thing that you would do differently, hindsight being 2020, and have the opportunity to start again?
Had hindsight being 2020, having I would have just launched more kinetic hubs faster.
I see.
So the reality here is that this problem is a large enough problem, and the way we're approaching the problem, we believe, is the right solution. But there was a little bit of trying to figure out who the right customer is. How do we, we didn't know, for instance, that the body shops that we work with and the insurance carriers that we partner with would see a two-sided network effect. It was not clear to us early on that there would be something like that. Where as we add more shops to our service network, more carriers would join, and as we add more carriers, more shops would join. It was not clear to me that a network effect would emerge here at the time, because I thought this was a very simple point solution service that we were offering. Now that I know that that is true, I would have built the network out even faster, for instance, right? So I think it just came down to learning that there are these hidden things that can propel a company faster, network effects being one of the strongest ones.
Yep.
And I think that had we raised too much money or tried to take a different approach to this, the network effect wouldn't even have become clear to us. It was more of a slower, the slow development early on helped us identify that a network effect exists and that the network effect is going to help us scale quickly. And I think that I don't know if there's a way in which we could have identified that earlier, but now that I know that there is a network effect, if I go back in time, I would probably just launch more hubs quickly.
So ironically, by going slow, you discovered the problem, and the problem would have been alleviated by going faster.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. So you had mentioned the N+1 problem with full autonomy. It does distinctively feel, with Waymo's progress here, we might be at a big unlock. Where we are going to start seeing Waymos in many more cities. How close do you, I mean, you're kind of an industry insider here. What's your perspective on this? Because there are big implications for you, right? This might be a brand new revenue stream for you, which then diversifies your revenue away from your core ideal customer profile, which are the collision shops right now.
I actually don't think of it that way. Okay. I actually think it's on a continuum. ADAS is part of that on-ramp to full autonomy, right? And the only thing that, even if you just take a step back and think about what are the things that don't change in this world, right? People are always going to want to go from point A to B. That's never going to go away. In fact, you make the cost of transportation cheaper, it gets adopted faster, right? Whatever that sort of Jevons paradox, is for transportation, it remains true in that case as well. The second fact here is that any car, regardless of whether it is human-driven, whether it's being controlled by a silicon-based system or a carbon-based life form, it still needs to be covered by insurance to be legally drivable. Right. And so those are the constants that don't change. So we have built a solution here that we think is the right solution for today, with these sort of constants in mind: insurance carriers who are underwriting the cost or that travel from point A to B, and the fact that those miles are only going to grow. Those two remain true no matter what, right? So when we think of self-driving and robotaxis specifically, right, Let's fast forward 10 years from today, or even 15 years from today. It's very likely that there'll be like perhaps some kind of private equity owner who owns 200 robotaxis that they deploy in Tahoe, or in Laguna Beach, and do a service contract with Waymo, or with Zoox. They do a insurance contract with like Allstate or some other insurance carrier, and a repair and maintenance contract with a company like Kinetic, where our automation or robots can do all the sort of core things that are needed in a preemptive way before these are in an accident. Right today, a lot of these, the difference between ADAS today and AV tomorrow from an aftermarket perspective is that ADAS calibrations are needed post collision, so post event, when something has happened to the vehicle. Tomorrow, and the reason that's the case is the human is still the redundancy behind the wheel.
Right.
When there is no human behind the wheel, it's not acceptable to say that those systems can fail. So you preemptively want to do more calibrations. You preemptively want to do more inspections and tests on the vehicle from a digital perspective. And so we just think that the volume of utilization of kinetic automation is going to be significantly higher as more and more of that transition happens.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So shifting gears a little bit, thinking about, is it important for you running a company to have one North Star metric to focus on? And if so, depending on your answer, what is that metric that you obsess over today?
Singular metric that I care the most about right now is our cycle time, right? Our operational cycle time. At the end of the day, for us to win in this sort of services industry, our SLAs have to be far superior than anyone else. And autonomy and automation provides that. Right. And so the faster we can return a car back to its sort of factory level safety state, and the faster we can get the car back to motorist's hands, it becomes really hard to displace us. Right? Operational switching costs are significantly steeper than any kind of contractual switching costs, right? Once people get used to something that gets done really fast, efficiently, precisely, it's very difficult for them to switch to something else. So that's my number one core metric I care about, is our operational SLAs, right? So we are 10 times faster than the traditional manual ways of calibrating vehicles. We are 5 times more precise on average compared to people doing it by hand, and so and we tend to be around half the cost as well, right? So we win on all three, and so those three kind of feed into this sort of singular metric of cycle time, which is the from the time the keys are handed to us to the time the keys are returned, and as that gets shorter and shorter without compromising the quality or the precision of the repair, I think that we win.
Very good, very good, man. It makes a lot of sense. So abstracting from the current, if everything works out according to plan, what does the company look like in 5 years?
Just more and more of this network of hubs, right? Like I said, like there is a very clear, I'm being very deliberate when I say network here, right? And it's a network because there are network effects, right? We're finding that as more repair shops partner with us, more insurers partner with us, and as more insurers partners and more repair shops partner with us, because there's a benefit to all when this happens, right? And so our goal is that we've figured out our business model, we've figured out the operational model. Each of these locations that we launch, we have clarity on when they hit cash flow positive, when they hit CapEx payback, and what the margins look like. And now it's just about repeating that playbook in a manner that we're operationally capable of doing. So the faster we can launch and the faster we can build this network out, the faster we can get to sort of a nationwide type of scale, and that's mainly sort of front and center on our mind at this moment, to sort of think about how we build this network out as fast as possible, with ADAS calibration being the first use case. But then we're also building out new services and capabilities. So over the next 5 to 10 years, it doesn't even have to be 5 years. In fact, we have some products that we're rolling out in the next couple of quarters that are beyond just ADAS calibration. So, I think that there is the ability for us to scale, and so we get the benefit of economies of scale as well as economies of scope, because we can do more things as we have a larger network, proprietary data, etc.
Great. Very helpful. Let's switch to fundraising. So you've raised now money from some real blue chip investors. How do you think about the right time to raise money with an enterprise like this? How much to raise? And then tell us a little bit about inside baseball, how you think about selecting the right investors.
Yeah, so maybe to sort of talk about each one of those topics. When it comes to deciding to raise money, I think especially in a sort of a market where you don't have clarity on exactly what the problem statement is. Like I said, the goalposts are moving here, right? It isn't static. It is a dynamically changing world with more and more cars having more and more ADAS each, right? So in a situation like this, it's helpful to have mental clarity on what does this look like in the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Go through that maze of possibilities and have a clear definition of, all right, for the next 2 years, here's what we can do, here's what we can control, and we're raising enough funding to get there. That is something that I find to be a disciplined way to raise money. And that's how I've approached fundraising, is very much to raise enough money to get to that sort of 18-month, 24-month plan, because the world is going to change in that time frame, but it's going to change in a more a linear way. It won't be a sort of step function nonlinear, which tends to be more, if you look 5 years out, 10 years out. So I prefer to raise enough money to make our plans to execute on our plans for an 18 to 24 months sort of time frame, and then rinse and repeat. And so that also dictates how much I raise. For instance, I like to be conservative, and I don't like to raise too much money. So I've always targeted rounds of financing that'll help us hit those sort of, call it 18 to 24 month milestones. And I think the last question you asked me was how I pick the investors who I partner with. It really comes down to spending a lot of time with them and understanding what their motivations are. Like, I have ambitions to build a large company here, and I think most blue chip investors have similar ambitions to see companies become, large winner take most type of outcomes, and so that's sort of table stakes. But it also comes down to, in my opinion, a love for the problem statement. Not a love for the solution space. Solutions changed. It's the problem statement that's that sort of remains true. And investors who appreciate that problem statement and who see that needs to be solved are the best investors, in my view, to partner with, because they continue to have conviction rather than just looking at a solution. And if a new solution replaces that a previous solution, they lose interest and start thinking about the other. So it really is a very thesis-driven type of investor profile that I look for.
That's great. And how did you elect us to be on the cap table here? We're honored to be on this journey with you, but how did you select Automotive Ventures to be on the cap table?
It was very much that. Like, from the time, that first meeting that we had when we got introduced, and every interaction that we've had ever since, it has been that sort of very thesis-driven view of investing that attracted me to you and your firm to invest in Kinetic. But I also like that. All right, so that's great for long-term alignment, but we're raising money for the next 18 to 24 months. How can you be helpful? And you were able to articulate that very clearly and execute on that, making the right introductions, be it with dealership groups or be it with other ecosystem partners or customers. And that's really what I love to see in an investor. And a thesis-driven investor who puts puts themselves in my shoes and goes, I think this introduction would be worthwhile for Nikhil. Let me just proactively make it because I know it makes sense. And when that introduction comes through, I absolutely want to take that meeting. I don't have to sort of go through the, oh, wait, why am I meeting with this person? And that's been true for the past few years here, right? That's why I value you and Automotive Ventures so much as a firm. And generally speaking, I think that that's key for someone who's trying to build a complex company like we're building, is to have sort of deep thinkers who are patient and who are sort of capable of putting themselves in the shoes of the operator and sort of helping on the margins, be it through introductions or be it through sort of ideas and things like that.
That's great. Well, it's very kind of you to say, and we're very honored to be on this journey with you and excited for the future. Couple questions, maybe to wrap here. If we could teleport you back in time and you had a chance to catch up and have a coffee with your 18-year-old self, what would you tell yourself that might change your path?
I would probably knowing what I know today on things that excite me and the problem statements and the types of things that I like to do. I've sort of landed in the right place in terms of the robotics technology and things like that, which was my dream when I was 18 years old, was to sort of build self-driving cars, and the idea that cars could drive themselves was something that was quite fascinating to me. And so I've always sort of been much more excited about long-term sort of thesis-driven types of things. I think that if I were to go that far back, I would probably have told myself, I don't think you need to do a PhD and spend 6 years in graduate school if you're not going to be an academic.
There you go. Give 6 years of your life back. That's good. I like that. I like that very much. So last one for you. I mean, there'll be a lot of entrepreneurs that are tuning into this segment. Any gems of wisdom that you might impart on the entrepreneur ecosystem, things that you would have avoided, pitfalls, best practices, daily routines, anything at all that you would like to tell the entrepreneurs of the world just to encourage them to pursue?
Absolutely. I think that a lot of the problems that I worked on through the last, call it 2 or 3 companies that I worked at, leading up to Kinetic, I fell in love with the solution and not the problem. And I was like, I have my hammer right now. I have this mapping technology, or I have this self-driving algorithm, and now I have to go find the problem where that fits. And I think that that was a grave mistake that I made. Instead of the entire thesis around Kinetic, and what we're doing here is much more focused on the problem, and the solution evolves itself to fit the problem. And there's always going to be nuggets of new technology and new things, and not to fall in love with some specific type of technology, and to be much more adaptive would be like the main feedback that I would have from to pivot from. And this is perhaps not true of all the entrepreneurs who tune in. I'm specifically perhaps talking to the more technologically driven ones that come from a background of engineering, where they are like, oh, I know how to build this specific thing. Let me go see where it's relevant. Tends to end badly most of the time, although there are edge cases for everything, and it has worked out well in some instances. But that would be like my main feedback, is to focus on the problem and go deeper and deeper in understanding the problem and the who faces the problem the most before deciding what the solution would be.
Very cool and great advice. So last question for you. One bold prediction maybe about the future that might not be widely held by folks.
I think that, I don't know if this is, well, I could say, since we're talking about robotics and automation, I'm not a believer in humanoids. I'm not a believer in sort of that form of articulation. I think that it's in maybe a handful of use cases could be relevant, but generally speaking, I think much more sort of solutions that are designed for that specific problem are going to continue to survive and thrive. So that's like a fundamental belief that I have. So that would be like one prediction. And the other, on the self-driving side of things, I think the notion that there would be sort of a large number of self-driving vehicles all owned and operated by fleets seems less likely to me, just like a very high balance sheet risk. I almost think it's more likely that this really works when there's 5 self-driving cars that somebody buys and puts on Turo or Uber and runs it out of their own garage. I actually feel like it's much more of a democratized motion rather than like a centralized depot. Again, I think that's much more further out, but those would be the 2 predictions.
That's great. Both make a lot of sense to me. Well, Nikhil, it's been a real pleasure. We were overdue for a catch up, so I appreciate you making time for this. But yeah, we're excited to be an investor and be a backer of Kinetic. We're really excited with you and the team, and really excited for the vision of the company. So I thank you for making time today, and let's continue the conversation.
Sounds great. This was fun. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Nikhil. Well, I really hope you enjoyed this episode of Greenfield. If you're a founder or investor in mobility and something here sparked an idea, I'd love to continue the conversation. Please subscribe to the Automotive Ventures Intel Report and reach out to me. I read every message and respond personally. We'll see you next time.